how quickly can the very fabric of a nation shift? Its religious identity, its cultural landscape, can it really transform in just a few decades? Today, we're taking a deep dive into exactly that kind of story. The, well, remarkable ascent of Islam in the United Kingdom. We're tracing its evolution from the post-war years right through some pretty compelling projections for 2040.
And this isn't just guesswork. Our deep dive today, it's really grounded in detailed historical work and forward-looking reports. We're pulling from census data, robust models from Pew Research, and official figures from the UK Office for National Statistics. So these sources let us map out the patterns and, project trends with a good degree of confidence.
Yeah, exactly. Our goal here is to give you a really comprehensive understanding of how Islam went from being, well, a relatively small immigrant community to a dynamic, nationally significant group. We're going to unpack some surprising facts and give you that critical context you need to really grasp this profound societal shift. So to really get this transformation, we have to go back to the ashes post-World War II Britain, a nation desperate to rebuild, right? What was that pivotal decision the UK made then that sort of kicked off this incredible demographic journey?
It's quite striking, actually. The huge labor shortages after the war, well, they led the UK to actively recruit workers from across the Commonwealth, particularly from its former colonies. So the earliest Muslim migrants, they predominantly came from specific places: Pakistan, especially the Mirpur area of Punjab, also India, Bangladesh, which was East Pakistan back then, and even communities from Yemen, Somalia, and some Caribbean nations. They answered that call.
Answered the call to fill jobs, yeah.
Vital roles in the recovering economy.
And these new arrivals, they didn't just spread out everywhere, did they? They settled in very specific areas, places like industrial towns, Birmingham, Bradford, Manchester, and certain London boroughs too, like Tower Hamlets and Newham. What's interesting there is how these initial clusters, they became the epicenters for, well, future shifts way beyond what anyone expected then.
Indeed. And the scale initially, you have to remember, was tiny. By the early 1960s, the estimated number of Muslims in Britain was maybe 80,000 to 100,000, somewhere in that range. When you think about that starting point, it really highlights the sheer scale of the transformation we're about to explore.
Wow, okay, so from that tiny initial footprint, how did these scattered arrivals start forming new actual communities? What were the key developments in the 70s and 80s?
Well, that period, it really marked a conscious effort to build, let's say, self-sustaining ecosystems. It went beyond just finding places to worship. You saw the rapid formation of mosques, proper madrasas for education, Islamic centers. The iconic London Central Mosque in Regent's Park, finished in the 70s, that's a prime example of this move towards prominence.
A very visible symbol.
Exactly. And you also saw the beginnings of Islamic schools, the setup for halal meat certifications, all signals of a more complete long-term presence being established.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing, was it? This wasn't just a story of building. These emerging communities, they were navigating some pretty tough social realities. Can you tell us a bit about the challenges they faced?
Absolutely. They faced significant hurdles, things like overt racial discrimination, de facto housing segregation, which often pushed them into specific, less desirable areas, and, widespread employment marginalization. It was a complex, often difficult landscape. Yet, despite those challenges, it was during this time that something crucial happened. A distinct British Muslim identity started to emerge. People began moving beyond identifying solely with their homeland.
Right, they weren't just Pakistani or Bangladeshi in Britain anymore.
Precisely. It became about their shared experiences and aspirations as Muslims living in Britain. That was a critical shift. And the numbers reflect this consolidation. By 1981, the Muslim population in the UK had grown to roughly 500,000.
Okay, 500,000 by 81. That's already a significant jump. But then moving into the 90s and 2000s, the numbers really accelerate. They become much more visible. What was driving that rapid boom?
The main drivers were pretty clear. Sustained family reunification was a big one, those initial migrants bringing over spouses, kids, and crucially, significantly higher birth rates within the community compared to the national average. This natural increase became a really powerful engine for growth.
Okay.
And you also started seeing the second generation coming of age, entering universities, public institutions. That signals a deeper embedding in broader British society.
And then, of course, everything changed, or at least the context did, after 9/11. That brought a sharp increase in Islamophobia, surveillance. A really difficult time. But what's fascinating is the counter-trend alongside that, this heightened political mobilization. How did those challenges actually fuel greater visibility and organization?
It was a really complex period. Intense scrutiny, yes, but it also, perhaps paradoxically, spurred this profound sense of collective identity and a real need for organized representation. You saw the formation of significant advocacy groups like the Muslim Council of Britain actively pushing for rights and understanding.
Finding a voice.
Finding a collective voice, exactly. And this political awakening, combined with British Muslims becoming more visible in media, politics, the arts, it pushed Islam much more into the public sphere, and the census data just lays it bare. Look, 2001, 1.6 million Muslims, about 2.8% of the UK population.
Okay.
Just 10 years later, 2011 census, that number nearly doubled to 2.7 million. That's around 4.8% of the population. That's a very rapid rate of change in just a decade.
A huge jump. And if we fast forward to today, what was once this, relatively small community has profoundly reshaped the UK's social cultural landscape.
Yeah.
How has Islam moved from the periphery to become such a central part of British life now?
It's undeniable. Islam is now the second largest religious group in the UK. And what's really striking is how urbanized the population is. They are overwhelmingly concentrated in major cities. London, for instance, they make up about 15% of the population.
15% in London. Wow.
Birmingham, nearly 30%. Bradford, just over 30%. Leicester, 23.5%. Luton, an incredible 32.9%. Manchester, 22.4%.
Those are significant percentages in major hubs.
Absolutely. And you see substantial communities, too, in places like Sheffield, Nottingham, Glasgow, about 7.9% there, Leeds, Newcastle. This concentration creates really distinct cultural footprints in these cities.
And it's not just about the raw numbers in cities, is it? We're seeing real, concrete examples of this integration across society. You think about Parliament, figures like Sadiq Khan as mayor of London. You look at education, some Muslim-majority schools outperforming national averages. And business, media,
Yeah.
entrepreneurs, influencers making their mark.
Exactly. It speaks to a deep rootedness and active participation now. The latest national figures back this up. The 2021 census for England and Wales,
Right.
3.87 million Muslims. That's 6.5% of the population.
6.5%.
And add to that Scotland's Muslim population, which was around 2.2% in 2022. So this isn't just growth anymore. It's the emergence of a truly significant demographic force that's shaping the nation.
Okay, that brings us to the really fascinating part, the future.
Yeah.
What do the projections tell us about the next couple of decades? How might Islam in the UK continue to evolve by, say, 2030 and 2040?
Well, the underlying trends that have been driving this growth, they look set to continue. Muslim communities generally have younger age structures, right? And consistently higher birth rates compared to the national average. So that natural increase combined with the urban concentration and, strong community support systems, that remains a key driver. But we also need to factor in other things. There's still ongoing immigration, though the levels fluctuate, from the Middle East, South Asia, Africa. And perhaps surprisingly for some, there's a noticeable number of converts joining the faith, estimated around 5,000 each year, particularly women. That adds another sort of layer to the growth.
Right. So our sources actually lay out 3 distinct future scenarios. It gives you a range of possibilities to consider. First up is Scenario A, the status quo. This basically assumes current trends in fertility and emigration just carry on as they are now.
And what's fascinating here is, under these current trends, the projection is for around 7.0 million Muslims by 2040. That would be roughly 10.5% of the UK population.
10.5%.
Yeah, think about that. If current trends hold, by 2040, potentially 1 in 10 people in Britain could be Muslim. That's a pretty significant milestone from where things started.
Okay, then there's Scenario B, accelerated growth. This one assumes maybe higher birth rates continue, or perhaps increased immigration, maybe from conflict zones or other global shifts, boosting the numbers even more. What impact does that path suggest?
Well, if you connect this to the bigger picture, under that kind of trajectory, the projection jumps to about 8.5 million Muslims by 2040. That's somewhere between 12% and 13% of the UK population.
12 to 13%.
Right. And this isn't just a demographic shift. It points towards a profound cultural convergence. In certain city centers, think Birmingham, Newham, Tower Hamlets, Islam, could actually approach parity with Christianity in terms of numbers of adherents. The everyday lived experience of what it means to be British in those areas would increasingly be intertwined with Islamic traditions and institutions.
That's a really significant potential shift in specific places.
Yeah.
Okay, finally, Scenario C, slowed growth. This scenario imagines a future where maybe fertility rates come down, perhaps due to urbanization, more education, integration, or maybe strict immigration caps are put in place. What does that future look like?
This raises an interesting point about how wider societal changes could influence religious demographics, right? Under this scenario, the projection is lower. Around 5.5 million Muslims by 2040. That's about 8% of the population.
Still significant growth, but slower.
Exactly. Islam would absolutely remain the second largest religion, but its overall national share would stay under 10%. It suggests a more moderate pace of change, maybe influenced more by internal factors within the community and wider society.
Right. So moving beyond just the numbers, what are the opportunities and challenges this growth presents for the UK as a whole? It's about more than just population figures, isn't it?
Absolutely. The opportunities are significant and quite diverse. You mentioned earlier that vibrant entrepreneurial spirit. We're seeing that not just in traditional businesses, but also growth in ethical finance, tech startups, creative industries, often rooted in faith principles, but with broad appeal.
Contributing to the economy.
Definitely contributing to the UK's diverse economy. And this growing presence also fosters an increasing political voice, deeper interfaith dialogue. It can really enrich the broader social fabric. However, there are also clear challenges. Persistent Islamophobia and, frankly, negative media portrayals remain significant barriers. They foster misunderstanding.
Yeah, that's still a major issue.
It is. And we also still see issues like housing segregation in some areas and socioeconomic disparities in certain urban zones. These things highlight an ongoing need for more inclusive policies, ensuring equitable integration for everyone. So what we've really unpacked today is this profound transformation. Islam in the UK, it's evolved from this small, post-colonial migrant faith community back in the 50s into what is now a vibrant, deeply rooted, politically visible demographic here in the 2020s. And looking ahead, the projections suggest that by 2040, Islam is likely to make up somewhere between, say, 8% and perhaps 13% of the British population. That's inevitably going to reshape the nation's identity.
So as you reflect on this deep dive, it really makes you consider how these profound demographic and cultural shifts might redefine what it truly means to be British in the coming decades, and how the UK will continue to evolve as a true multicultural society. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.